Anatoly is humiliated upon arriving in Saudi Arabia to fight. His reaction shocks the world. They spit on my shoes the moment I stepped off the plane. Not metaphorically. Literally. A photographer, paid by someone who wanted me to feel small, leaned close enough that I could smell the coffee on his breath and let the saliva fall onto the leather of my boots. The cameras flashed. The crowd laughed. And I stood there, under the crushing heat of the Saudi sun, feeling every eye in that airport terminal strip away whatever dignity I thought I'd carried across the ocean. Subscribe to this channel if you've ever felt the weight of humiliation so heavy you thought it might break your spine. Because what happened next changed everything I thought I knew about strength. I didn't move. Not at first. My fists clenched at my sides, knuckles white, the veins in my forearms threatening to burst through the skin. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to react, to show them what happens when you disrespect a man who's lifted more weight than most of them will see in their lifetimes. But I'd learned something over the years, something that the iron had beaten into me through countless hours in gyms that smelled like rust and desperation. Real strength isn't about the reaction. It's about the control. It's about knowing when to unleash the storm and when to let it build inside you until the pressure creates something unbreakable. The man who'd spit on my shoes backed away slowly, his face twisted into a smirk that made my stomach turn. Behind him, a group of local fighters stood with their arms crossed, their designer clothes immaculate, their watches probably worth more than everything I owned. This wasn't just about a fight. This was about making a statement. They'd brought me here, to this gleaming monument to wealth and excess, not because they respected me, but because they wanted to watch me fall. They wanted to prove that an old man from the streets of Russia, a nobody who'd clawed his way up through underground gyms and forgotten competitions, didn't belong in their world. The promoter, a man named Khalil with a perfectly trimmed beard and eyes that never quite met mine when he spoke, stepped forward with his hands raised in mock apology. "Mr. Anatoly, please, you must understand, the press here, they are very passionate. They want to see fire. They want to see emotion. This is all part of the show, yes." I looked at him for a long moment, letting the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. The cameras kept flashing. The crowd kept watching. And I thought about all the times in my life when people had tried to make me feel like nothing. The teachers who said I'd never amount to anything. The coaches who told me I was too old, too slow, too broken to compete. The women who'd looked through me like I was invisible. The men who'd laughed when I said I wanted to be strong. "Show," I said finally, my accent thick, my voice low. "You want show. I give you show." I turned away from Khalil, away from the cameras, and walked toward the exit. My bag felt heavy on my shoulder, not because of the weight, but because of everything it represented. Inside were my training clothes, worn thin from years of use. My wraps, stained with blood and sweat. A photograph of my daughter, the only family I had left, the only person who still believed in me when the rest of the world had moved on. And beneath it all, wrapped in an old shirt, the medal I'd won in my first real competition, back when I was young and stupid and thought that success would change everything. Have you ever walked through a crowd of people who want to see you destroyed? In a few moments, you'll understand why that walk through the airport felt longer than any journey I'd ever taken. The heat outside was suffocating. Riyadh in August feels like the sun has decided to press itself directly against your skin, to test whether you'll melt or harden. I stood on the curb, waiting for the car that was supposed to take me to the hotel, and I could feel the sweat already soaking through my shirt. But it wasn't the heat that bothered me. It was the feeling of being watched, of being judged, of being turned into entertainment for people who'd never understand what it meant to sacrifice everything for a single moment of validation. The car arrived 15 minutes late, a black SUV with tinted windows and air conditioning that barely worked. The driver didn't speak to me, didn't even acknowledge my presence beyond a slight nod. I climbed into the back seat and stared out the window as we drove through the city, past gleaming skyscrapers and construction sites where men who looked like they came from the same places I did worked in the brutal sun for wages that would barely feed their families. The contrast was almost obscene. Wealth and poverty, existing side by side, separated by nothing more than luck and circumstance and the accident of birth. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A message from Victor, my old training partner, the only person from my past who still checked in on me. "Saw the video," it read. "Don't let them break you. Remember who you are. Remember who you are." As if I could forget. As if every scar on my body, every callus on my hands, every ache in my joints didn't remind me every single day of the journey that had brought me here. I wasn't some young prospect with a bright future and a team of sponsors behind me. I was a survivor. I was a man who'd been written off so many times that I'd stopped counting, who'd learned to find strength not in the applause of crowds, but in the quiet moments before dawn when it was just me and the weight and the knowledge that I had one more rep left in me. The hotel was exactly what I'd expected. Expensive. Cold. Designed to impress rather than to comfort. The lobby had marble floors that echoed with every footstep, and the staff all wore the same practiced smile that never quite reached their eyes. I checked in quickly, avoiding eye contact with the other guests who were probably here for the fight, probably wealthy businessmen or celebrities who'd paid thousands of dollars for the privilege of watching men hurt each other. My room was on the 15th floor, with a view of the city that should have been impressive but just felt empty. I dropped my bag on the bed and walked to the window, pressing my forehead against the cool glass. Somewhere out there, in a gym I'd visit tomorrow, my opponent was training. His name was Rashid Al-Mansour, a rising star in the Middle Eastern fighting circuit, 20 years younger than me, with a perfect record and a social media following that numbered in the millions. He'd made his career on highlight reel knockouts and trash talk that his fans ate up like candy. He'd also made it very clear, in every interview leading up to this fight, that he considered me a joke. An old man desperate for one last payday. A relic from a bygone era who didn't understand that the sport had evolved, that strength alone wasn't enough anymore, that you needed speed and technique and the kind of athletic ability that time inevitably steals from everyone. Maybe he was right. Maybe I was a fool for accepting this fight, for believing that I still had something to prove. But here's the thing about being underestimated your entire life. You stop needing external validation. You stop caring whether people believe in you. You develop an internal compass that points toward the only truth that matters, which is whether you believe in yourself. And despite everything, despite the humiliation at the airport and the knowledge that the odds were stacked against me, I still believed. Do you know what it's like to carry the weight of everyone's doubt while simultaneously refusing to let it crush you? Soon, you'll see exactly how I transformed that doubt into something they never expected. The next morning, I woke before sunrise, as I always did. Old habits die hard, and the discipline of decades doesn't disappear just because you're in a foreign country in a hotel room that costs more per night than I used to make in a month. I pulled on my training clothes, the same ones I'd worn for years, and headed down to the hotel gym. It was empty, thank God, just rows of pristine equipment that looked like it had barely been used. Rich people pay for gym memberships but rarely show up. That's one of the many differences between them and people like me. I started with the basics. Push-ups, pull-ups, body weight squats. My body protested, as it always did in the beginning, joints stiff from sleep, muscles resistant to the idea of work. But I pushed through, finding the rhythm that had sustained me through countless training sessions, the almost meditative state where pain becomes just another sensation, where effort becomes its own reward. After an hour, I moved to the weights. The hotel gym didn't have the heavy equipment I was used to, but that didn't matter. I'd learned long ago that strength comes from intention, not just from the amount of weight on the bar. I loaded up the barbell with everything they had, plates that clinked together with a satisfying metallic sound, and began my working sets. Deadlifts, squats, overhead press. Each rep deliberate, each breath controlled, each movement a statement of purpose. I was halfway through my final set when I noticed him. A young man, maybe 25, wearing expensive workout clothes that still had the tags visible, standing in the doorway with his phone out, recording me. I could see myself in his screen, bent over the bar, face red with effort, the weight trembling in my grip as I fought to complete the rep. I finished the set, lowered the weight with a crash that echoed through the gym, and turned to face him. He had the decency to look embarrassed, at least, lowering the phone slightly but not putting it away completely. "You're Anatoly," he said in English with a British accent. "The guy who's fighting Rashid." "Yes," I said, reaching for my towel, wiping the sweat from my face. "Can I ask you a question?" He stepped into the gym, his phone still in his hand, his finger hovering over the record button like he was hoping I'd say something controversial he could clip and share. "Why did you accept this fight? Everyone knows you're going to lose. Everyone knows Rashid is going to embarrass you. So why put yourself through this?" I looked at him for a long moment, this young man with his perfect teeth and his expensive clothes and his complete lack of understanding about what it meant to fight for something beyond money or fame. And I realized that I couldn't explain it to him, not in a way he'd understand. How could I make him see that some things are worth doing even when you know the odds are against you? How could I help him understand that the fight itself, the act of stepping into the ring despite knowing you might lose, was sometimes more important than the victory? "You think you know how story ends," I said finally. "Maybe you right. Maybe you wrong. But story not over until it over." He frowned, clearly disappointed by my answer, clearly hoping for something more dramatic, more quotable. But I turned away from him, back to the weights, and he eventually left, probably to post his video with some caption about the sad old man who didn't know when to quit. Let him post. Let them all laugh. I'd heard worse. The rest of the day passed in a blur of obligations. A press conference where Rashid sat beside me on the stage, his presence commanding, his smile perfect, his words designed to diminish me while making himself look magnanimous. "I respect Anatoly's career," he said into the microphone, his English flawless, his delivery smooth. "But this is a new generation. This is a new era. And sometimes, legends need to understand when their time has passed." The journalists ate it up. The cameras loved him. And I sat there, silent, letting him have his moment, because words had never been my weapon. I'd learned long ago that talk was cheap, that promises meant nothing without action to back them up. So I said nothing. I just nodded when asked direct questions, kept my answers short, and watched as Rashid's confidence grew with every passing minute. After the press conference, there was a medical check, a formality that involved standing in a sterile room while doctors poked and prodded and made notes on their clipboards. They checked my heart rate, my blood pressure, my reflexes. One of them, an older man with kind eyes, pulled me aside after the exam. "Your blood pressure is high," he said quietly. "Not dangerously so, but elevated. Are you sure you want to go through with this fight? At your age, the risks." "I know risks," I interrupted. "Thank you for concern. But I fight." He nodded slowly, like he'd expected that answer but felt obligated to try anyway. "Then take care of yourself. Don't push beyond your limits. There's no shame in." "I know my limits," I said, more firmly this time. "I live at my limits for 40 years. I know them better than I know anything else." That evening, alone in my hotel room, I allowed myself a moment of doubt. Just one moment, sitting on the edge of the bed with my head in my hands, feeling the weight of every year I'd lived, every battle I'd fought, every scar I'd earned. My body hurt in ways it never used to. My joints ached with the memory of old injuries. My reflection in the mirror showed a man who'd been worn down by time and gravity and the relentless demands of a sport that took everything and gave back only pain and the occasional moment of glory. Why was I doing this? The question echoed in my mind, refusing to be silenced. The money wasn't enough to justify the risk. The fame I'd gained had always been fleeting, forgotten as soon as the next young prospect came along. So what was I fighting for? The answer came slowly, like sunrise breaking through clouds. I was fighting because it was all I knew. Because the gym had been my salvation when I had nothing else. Because the weight on the bar had been more honest with me than any person I'd ever met. Because in a world full of lies and disappointments and betrayals, the iron had always been true. If you put in the work, you got results. If you pushed yourself, you grew stronger. It was simple, pure, the only thing in my life that had ever made sense. Have you ever felt like the only time you truly understand yourself is when you're in pain, when you're pushing past your limits, when you're testing the absolute boundaries of what you're capable of? In the next moments, you'll see how that understanding became my greatest weapon. The days leading up to the fight were a strange combination of routine and surrealism. Every morning, I trained. Every afternoon, I dealt with the obligations of being a fighter in a high-profile bout. More interviews, more photo shoots, more opportunities for Rashid and his team to mock me while maintaining the veneer of respect. Every evening, I returned to my hotel room, ordered simple food that the kitchen staff probably thought was beneath them, and rested. But beneath the routine, tension built. I could feel it in the way people looked at me, in the whispers that followed me through hotel corridors, in the social media posts that Victor forwarded me even though I'd told him not to. The narrative had been set. Anatoly, the aging warrior, brought in to be sacrificed on the altar of Rashid's rising fame. A cautionary tale about knowing when to step away. A reminder that time catches up with everyone eventually. The worst part wasn't the mockery. I dealt with that my entire life. The worst part was the pity. The journalists who spoke to me like I was a confused old man who'd wandered into the wrong place. The fans who approached me not for autographs but to express their concern, to tell me that they hoped I wouldn't get hurt too badly, to wish me luck in a tone that suggested they'd already written my eulogy. 3 days before the fight, Khalil, the promoter, invited me to dinner. I almost declined, but something in his voice when he called suggested this was more than just a social obligation. We met at a restaurant on the top floor of one of Riyadh's tallest buildings, a place where the wealthy gathered to see and be seen, where the food was more art than sustenance, where a single meal cost more than most people earned in a week. Khalil was already seated when I arrived, a glass of something expensive in his hand, his suit perfectly tailored, his demeanor relaxed in a way that immediately put me on guard. Rich men only relaxed when they thought they had all the power. "Anatoly," he said, gesturing to the seat across from him. "Thank you for coming. Please, sit. Order whatever you like." I sat, waved away the menu the waiter offered, and ordered water. Khalil raised an eyebrow but didn't comment. "You've been very professional throughout this process," he said after a moment. "Very cooperative. I appreciate that. Some fighters, they cause problems, they make demands, they forget that this is a business. But you understand. You've been around long enough to understand how things work." I said nothing, just watched him, waiting for whatever point he was building toward. He leaned forward, lowering his voice despite the fact that the nearest table was far enough away that they couldn't possibly overhear. "I want to talk to you about the fight. About how it ends." "It ends when someone wins," I said flatly. "Yes, of course. But let me speak plainly. Rashid is very important to us. He's the future of combat sports in this region. He has the look, the charisma, the skill. He's going to be a star. And this fight, it's a crucial step in building his legacy." "So you want me to lose?" I said, not as a question but as a statement. Khalil spread his hands in a gesture that was probably meant to seem reasonable. "I'm not asking you to do anything that wasn't already going to happen. We both know how this fight is likely to end. Rashid is younger, faster, more technically skilled. The odds are heavily in his favor. All I'm suggesting is that you could make it easier, cleaner, less painful for yourself." "You want me to take dive?" I said, my accent making the words harsher than they might have been otherwise. "I want you to be smart," Khalil corrected. "I want you to protect yourself. And in exchange, I'm prepared to increase your purse significantly. Double what we agreed upon. Enough money to retire comfortably, to take care of your daughter, to never have to step into a ring again unless you want to." The mention of my daughter made my jaw clench. That he knew about her, that he'd researched me enough to know about the one person in the world who mattered to me, felt like a violation. But I kept my expression neutral, kept my voice steady. "I come here to fight," I said. "Not to perform. If you want performer, hire actor." Khalil's friendly demeanor cracked slightly, his smile becoming strained. "Anatoly, be reasonable. You're not going to win this fight. All you're going to do is get hurt, embarrass yourself, and walk away with less money than I'm offering you right now. Why suffer when you don't have to?" I stood up, the chair scraping against the floor loud enough to draw attention from nearby tables. "In my country we have saying, 'Man who sells his honor for money ends up with neither.' Thank you for dinner. I'm not hungry." I walked out of the restaurant, leaving Khalil sitting alone, his face flushed with anger or embarrassment or both. The elevator ride down felt longer than it should have, my heart pounding not from fear but from rage. They thought they could buy me. They thought my integrity was just another commodity to be negotiated. They thought that because I was old, because I was from a poor background, because I'd struggled my entire life, that I'd be willing to trade everything that mattered for a check. They were wrong. Do you know what it feels like to realize that everyone around you sees you as nothing more than a tool to be used and discarded? You're about to discover how that realization transformed into the fuel I needed to prove them all catastrophically wrong. The night before the fight, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing through everything that had brought me to this moment. I thought about my childhood in Russia, growing up in an apartment so small that my 3 brothers and I shared a single room, where winters were brutal and food was scarce, and the only escape was the gym down the street where an old coach named Dmitri let neighborhood kids train for free as long as they worked hard and didn't cause trouble. I thought about the first time I touched a barbell, how the weight had felt impossibly heavy in my hands, how Dmitri had laughed and told me that everything feels impossible until you do it. I thought about the years of training, the competitions I'd won and lost, The injuries that should have ended my career but didn't because I was too stubborn to quit. I thought about my ex-wife, who'd left when she realized that being married to a fighter meant being married to someone whose first love would always be the gym. I thought about my daughter, who I'd barely seen for years but who still called me on my birthday, who still believed in me even when I didn't believe in myself. And I thought about all the people who'd told me I couldn't do something. The coaches who'd said I didn't have the genetics to be a champion. The doctors who'd recommended I retire after my third concussion. The promoters who'd stopped returning my calls when younger fighters became available. The fans who'd forgotten my name as soon as the next big thing came along. Every single one of them had been right to doubt me. The odds had always been against me. I'd never been the most talented, never been the most naturally gifted, never been the person everyone pointed to as a future star. But I'd had something that talent couldn't match and genetics couldn't replicate. I'd had the willingness to suffer. The ability to push through pain that would make other people quit. The stubborn, stupid, beautiful refusal to accept that my limitations defined my potential. At 2 in the morning, I got out of bed and did what I always did when my mind wouldn't quiet. I dropped to the floor and started doing push-ups. 100. 200. I lost count somewhere around 300, my arms shaking, my chest burning, sweat soaking through my shirt. But I kept going, because the physical pain was easier to deal with than the mental noise, because exhaustion was the only thing that had ever been able to silence my doubts. When I finally stopped, lying flat on the hotel room floor, gasping for air, I felt something click into place. A clarity that came from the edge of my physical limits, understanding that could only be found in the space between effort and collapse. I'd spent my entire life proving people wrong. Tomorrow would be no different. Win or lose, I would show them that I belonged in that ring. I would make them remember that age and experience and the kind of strength that comes from surviving hardship are worth more than youth and talent and social media followers. I would remind them who I was. The morning of the fight arrived with the kind of bright, merciless sunlight that makes everything feel overexposed. I went through my routine mechanically. Light breakfast, stretching, a warm-up that was more ritual than necessity at this point. Victor called from Russia, his voice crackling through a bad connection, offering last-minute advice and encouragement that I appreciated but didn't need. I knew what I had to do. I'd known for weeks. Maybe I'd known my entire life. The arena was massive, a purpose-built venue that held 20,000 people, all of whom had paid substantial amounts of money to watch Rashid destroy me. I arrived early, before the crowds, and was led through concrete corridors to a dressing room that was significantly smaller and less impressive than what I assumed Rashid had been given. The room smelled like disinfectant and old sweat, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the concrete walls bare except for a mirror that showed me exactly who I was, an old man about to step into a fight he had no business taking. My corner team was small. A cut man I'd worked with before, a trainer who'd agreed to work this bout mainly because he felt sorry for me, and a doctor who was required to be present but clearly would rather be anywhere else. They helped me wrap my hands in silence, the ritual familiar and comforting. I focused on the feeling of the tape tightening around my knuckles, the way the wrap supported my wrists, preparing my body for the violence to come. Outside, I could hear the arena filling up. The roar of the crowd was distant but growing, a sound like ocean waves building toward a storm. They were excited. They'd come to see a spectacle. And I was going to give them one, though not in the way they expected. Rashid arrived at the arena an hour after I did, his entrance announced by music and cameras and an entourage that seemed to include half the population of Riyadh. I could hear the crowd's reaction even from my dressing room, the explosion of cheers and applause that greeted their hero. The contrast couldn't have been more obvious. He was the star. I was the opening act. He was the future. I was the past. He was everything this sport wanted. I was everything it was trying to forget. Perfect. When the knock came on my dressing room door, signaling it was time to walk to the ring, I stood slowly, rolling my shoulders, feeling my body settle into the state it had learned to find before every fight. The nervousness disappeared. The doubt quieted. Everything became simple, reduced to the most basic truth. In a few minutes, another man would try to hurt me, and I would do everything in my power to hurt him first. The walk to the ring was exactly what I'd expected. A long corridor lined with security guards and officials who wouldn't meet my eyes. A building noise as we approached the arena. Then, suddenly, I was walking through the curtain and into the lights, and the sound hit me like a physical force. 20,000 people booing. Not just booing casually, but actively, enthusiastically, hatefully. A wall of sound designed to break anyone who wasn't strong enough to stand against it. They threw drinks. They threw food. They threw everything they could reach that security wouldn't confiscate. And they screamed at me, in English and Arabic, words I understood and words I didn't, all of them meant to diminish, to hurt, to remind me that I wasn't welcome here. I walked slowly, deliberately, my face expressionless, my eyes forward. I climbed into the ring, and the booing somehow got louder. The announcer tried to introduce me, but his words were drowned out by the crowd's hatred. I stood in my corner, alone, listening to them express their disgust at my existence, and I felt something strange happen. I smiled. Not a big smile. Not a show for the cameras. Just a small, genuine expression of something that might have been joy or might have been madness or might have been the perfect synthesis of both. Because in that moment, listening to 20,000 people hate me, I realized something profound. They could take everything from me. They could mock me, humiliate me, dismiss me as irrelevant. But they couldn't take away the one thing that had always been mine. My ability to choose how I responded to their hatred. And I chose not to care. Then Rashid made his entrance, and if my walk had been met with hatred, his was greeted with pure adoration. The music was deafening. The lights were blinding. He walked to the ring surrounded by his team, his robe glittering, his smile perfect, his confidence absolute. He climbed through the ropes like he owned the ring, the arena, the entire world, and maybe in some ways he did. We met in the center for the referee's instructions, standing close enough that I could see the perfect fade of his haircut, smell the expensive cologne he wore, notice the complete lack of fear in his eyes when he looked at me. He saw an old man. A stepping stone. A memory that would make his highlight reel more impressive. "Make it easy on yourself," he said quietly, so only I could hear. "Don't embarrass yourself more than you already have." I looked at him, this beautiful, talented, confident young man who'd never known real struggle, who'd never had to fight for anything more than glory, who'd been given every advantage and assumed they made him superior. And I said nothing, because he would understand soon enough. The referee separated us. We returned to our corners. The announcer gave the formal introductions, though no one could hear them over the noise. The lights dimmed everywhere except over the ring. And then the bell rang. Rashid came at me fast, just as I'd expected, looking to end the fight early, to give the crowd the quick, brutal knockout they'd paid to see. His first combination was technically perfect. Jab, cross, hook, each punch thrown with textbook form and blistering speed. I slipped the jab, blocked the cross, and took the hook on my shoulder, feeling the impact radiate through my body but not letting it move me. His eyes widened slightly. Just a fraction. Just enough for me to see that he'd expected those punches to do more damage. I didn't counter. Not yet. I just moved, using footwork that was old and economical and based on 40 years of understanding how bodies move in space. I circled, I backed up. I made him work for every inch of the ring. And I watched. I studied. I learned. Rashid was talented, no question. His technique was excellent. His speed was remarkable. But there was something missing, something fundamental that no amount of training could teach if you hadn't learned it through suffering. He didn't know how to fight when things weren't going according to plan. He'd never had to dig deep, to find something beyond technique and conditioning, because he'd never been truly tested. He threw another combination. Then another. Each one powerful, each one well-constructed, each one failing to land cleanly because I'd seen variations of these same punches thousands of times before, thrown by fighters who were just as talented and twice as desperate. The first round ended with Rashid ahead on points but clearly frustrated. I returned to my corner, where my trainer offered water and advice I mostly ignored. I wasn't fighting Rashid's fight. I wasn't trying to out-technique him or outspeed him. I was fighting a different battle entirely, one he didn't even know was happening. The second round started the same way. Rashid pressing forward, throwing beautiful combinations, landing some shots but not the devastating ones he wanted. And I kept moving, kept surviving, kept watching. I could see his frustration building, see the way his perfect technique started to get sloppy as he pressed harder, searching for the knockout that would validate everything the crowd believed about him. Halfway through the second round, I saw my opening. It wasn't anything dramatic, just a slight overextension on a cross, a moment where his weight was committed forward and his backhand dropped a fraction of an inch lower than it should have. A mistake that a younger version of me would have missed. A mistake that even current me might have missed if I hadn't spent 4 decades learning to read fighters the way scholars read books. I stepped inside his next combination, closer than anyone had gotten to him in his last 5 fights, and drove my right hand into his body, just below the ribs, in the spot where the liver sits protected by only muscle and skin. I put everything into that punch. Not just my arm strength, but my legs, my core, my back, every muscle in my body working in perfect synchronization, delivering force the way the human body was designed to deliver it before we invented machines to do the work for us. The sound of the impact was audible even over the crowd. A wet thud that made the people in the first few rows wince. Rashid's face went pale. His perfect posture collapsed. And he dropped to one knee, his hand pressed against his side, his mouth open in a silent gasp as his body tried to process the pain. The referee started counting. The arena went silent in a way I hadn't thought possible. 20,000 people, all of them certain they knew how this story ended, suddenly realizing they might have been wrong. Rashid got up at 8, because he was tough and proud and had never been taught that sometimes staying down is the smarter choice. The referee checked him, asked if he could continue. Rashid nodded, raised his hands, tried to look ready. But I could see it in his eyes. The doubt, the fear, the realization that he'd underestimated me, that this wasn't going to be the easy victory everyone had promised him. Have you ever watched someone's entire worldview shatter in real time? In the next moments, you'll see how that single punch changed everything, not just for Rashid, but for everyone watching. The referee waved us back together, and suddenly Rashid wasn't the confident rising star anymore. He was a fighter in survival mode, backing up, clinching, trying to create space and time to recover. But I didn't let him. I pressed forward, not wild, not reckless, but with the steady, patient pressure of someone who knows exactly what they're doing. I worked the body. Left hook to the ribs. Right hand to the liver. Uppercut to the solar plexus. Each punch deliberate, each one designed to drain his energy, to make his arms feel heavy, to turn his legs to rubber. This wasn't about flash. This wasn't about highlights. This was about breaking him down systematically, the way you break down an opponent when you understand that fighting is as much mental as physical. The second round ended with Rashid stumbling back to his corner, his perfect hair disheveled, his expensive shorts stained with sweat, his team surrounding him and probably telling him things he didn't want to hear. My corner was quiet. My trainer looked at me with something like awe. "What are you doing?" he whispered. "How are you doing this?" I didn't answer. I just rinsed my mouth, spit into the bucket, and waited for the bell. The third round was when everything changed. Rashid came out desperate, abandoning the technical perfection that had made him famous, throwing wild punches, looking for the one big shot that would turn the fight around. It was exactly what I wanted. Desperate fighters make mistakes. And I'd built a career on capitalizing on mistakes. He threw a overhand right with everything he had, the kind of punch that would have knocked me unconscious if it landed. I slipped it by inches, felt the wind of it pass by my ear, and countered with a left hook that caught him clean on the jaw. His head snapped to the side. His legs wobbled. And I knew. I followed up with a right cross, then another left hook, then a right uppercut that lifted him onto his toes. He was still standing, still technically conscious, but his body had given up even if his mind hadn't. The referee stepped in, waving his arms, stopping the fight before Rashid could take any more damage. The arena exploded. Not with cheers but with shock. Disbelief. Confusion. 20,000 people trying to process what they'd just witnessed. The old man wasn't supposed to win. The underdog wasn't supposed to triumph. The story wasn't supposed to end this way. But it did. I didn't celebrate. I didn't raise my hands or yell or do any of the things fighters are supposed to do when they win. I just walked to Rashid, who was being tended to by his corner team, and offered my hand. He looked at it for a long moment, his face a mixture of humiliation and respect, before taking it. "You good fighter," I said. "But you never had to want it bad enough. Maybe now you learn." He nodded, unable to speak, and I turned away, leaving the ring the same way I'd entered it. Alone, quiet, unbothered by the noise around me. The aftermath was chaos. Interviews I barely participated in. Journalists asking questions I didn't care to answer. Khalil trying to act like this outcome was somehow what he'd wanted all along, like he hadn't offered me money to take a dive just days earlier. I went through the motions, said the things I was supposed to say,
collected my purse minus the bonus he'd offered for losing, and left the arena as quickly as I could. Back in my hotel room, finally alone, I sat on the edge of the bed and let myself feel everything I'd been holding back. The pain in my hands from throwing punches without mercy. The ache in my ribs from the shots I'd taken. The exhaustion that comes from pushing your body to its absolute limits. And beneath it all, something else. Not quite happiness, not quite satisfaction, but something close to peace. I'd proven what I needed to prove. Not to Rashid, not to the crowd, not even to the critics and doubters who'd said I was finished. I'd proven it to myself. That I still had it. That age might slow me down, but it hadn't broken me. That there was still value in experience, in toughness, in the kind of strength that can only be earned through decades of refusing to quit. My phone buzzed. A message from Victor. I knew you would do it. I never doubted. Then another message, this one from my daughter. Dad, I saw the fight. I'm so proud of you. Call me when you can. I stared at that second message for a long time, reading it over and over, feeling emotions I wasn't equipped to name threatened to overwhelm me. When was the last time someone had said they were proud of me? When was the last time I'd felt like I'd done something worth being proud of? I called her. She answered on the first ring. And for the first time in months, maybe years, I let myself just be a father talking to his daughter, not a fighter or a symbol or a cautionary tale, just a man who'd done something difficult and wanted to share it with a person who mattered most. I saw what they did to you at the airport, she said. How they treated you. I was so angry. Is okay, I said. They thought they know story. They wrong. Dad, why do you keep doing this? Why do you keep fighting when everyone says you should stop? I thought about her question, trying to find words for something I'd never been able to articulate properly. When I am in ring, I said slowly, when I am lifting weight, when I am pushing my body past what it should do. This is only time I feel like I am exactly who I'm supposed to be. Is only time everything makes sense. I know this sounds strange. I know you worry. But I cannot stop being what I am. And what I am is fighter. She was quiet for a moment. Then, I understand. I don't like it, but I understand. Just promise me you'll be careful. Promise me you'll know when it's really time to stop. I promise, I said, and meant it, even though we both knew it was a promise I might not be able to keep. We talked for another hour, about her life, her job, her plans for the future. Normal things. Things that had nothing to do with fighting or strength or proving myself. And it felt good, feeling like a person instead of a symbol, feeling like someone's father instead of just a fighter who was too stupid to quit. After we hung up, I went to the window and looked out at Riyadh one last time. The city of wealth and excess and beautiful cruelty. I'd come here expecting to be humiliated. I'd been humiliated. But I'd also done something they hadn't expected. I'd reminded them that you can't measure a person's worth by their age or their bank account or their social media following. That sometimes the ones who look weakest are the ones who've developed the kind of strength that can't be seen until it's tested. The video of my arrival, the one where the photographer spit on my shoes, was still circulating online. But now there were new videos too. Videos of me body-shotting Rashid into submission. Videos of the crowd's stunned silence. Videos of me walking out of the arena, alone and unbothered, leaving behind a legacy that no one could dismiss. Some of the comments had changed. Not all of them. There were still plenty of people saying I'd gotten lucky, that Rashid had underestimated me, that this was a fluke that meant nothing. But there were others now, people who'd watched me refuse to be broken and found something inspiring in it. People who'd seen an old man stand up to humiliation and respond not with words but with action. I didn't care about the comments, positive or negative. I'd never fought for their approval. But I couldn't deny that there was something satisfying about knowing that I'd changed the narrative, that I'd taken a story everyone thought they knew and rewritten the ending. Do you understand now? Do you see why I keep fighting even when everyone says I should stop? Because this is who I am. This is what I do. And as long as my body can still move, as long as my heart still beats, as long as there's weight to lift and opponents to face, I will keep doing it. Not for them. For me. 3 days later, I was back in Russia, back in my small apartment with its familiar sounds and smells, back to the gym where Dmitry still trained neighborhood kids for free. He welcomed me back with a nod and a handshake, asked no questions about the fight, just put me to work cleaning equipment and helping spot the younger fighters. It was exactly what I needed. The return to normalcy. The reminder that glory is fleeting but the work is eternal. The understanding that who I am isn't defined by my victories or defeats but by my willingness to keep showing up, to keep pushing, to keep finding new limits to test. A week after I returned, a package arrived. Inside was a check from Khalil's promotion company, for the exact amount he'd offered me to lose, with a note attached, "You earned this. Consider it a bonus for giving us a fight nobody will forget." I stared at the check for a long time. Part of me wanted to tear it up, to send it back, to maintain the moral high ground. But that would have been pride talking, and pride was a luxury I couldn't afford. My daughter needed help with her rent. My own apartment needed repairs. And the gym where I trained could always use better equipment. I cashed the check. I sent money to my daughter. I donated to the gym. And I kept the rest, not as a trophy but as a reminder that sometimes life surprises you, that sometimes doing the right thing doesn't mean suffering, that sometimes integrity gets rewarded even when you're not expecting it. The months that followed were quiet. I trained. I worked part-time at the gym. I reconnected with my daughter, speaking to her more regularly, even visiting her once in Moscow, meeting her boyfriend, seeing the life she'd built for herself. I lived simply, the way I always had, because complexity had never suited me. I got offers for more fights, of course. Promoters who wanted to capitalize on my unexpected victory, who saw me as a valuable commodity now instead of a washed-up has-been. I turned them all down. Not because I was afraid of fighting again, but because I'd accomplished what I needed to accomplish. I'd proven that I wasn't finished. I'd reminded the world and myself that I still had value. Anything else would have just been repetition, and I'd never been interested in doing things just because I could. Instead, I focused on training the next generation. The young fighters who came to Dimitri's gym, looking for the same salvation I'd found there decades earlier. I taught them what I knew, not just about technique or conditioning, but about the mental side of fighting, about how to find strength in adversity, about how to keep going when everything in you wants to quit. Some of them listened. Most didn't. That's the way it always is. You can show people the path, but you can't walk it for them. They have to want it badly enough to endure the suffering, the doubt, the constant testing of their limits. Most people don't want it that badly. And that's okay. Not everyone is meant to be a fighter. But every once in a while, I saw someone with that look in their eyes. That hunger. That willingness to sacrifice everything for a goal that might never materialize. When I saw that look, I remembered myself at that age, and I pushed them harder, demanded more from them because I knew they could take it. Because I knew that the ones who make it are the ones who refuse to accept their limitations as final. A year after the fight in Riyadh, I was training a kid named Alexei, 17 years old, skinny and scared but with surprising determination. He'd been coming to the gym for 6 months, showing up every day without fail, doing the work without complaint. But he was getting discouraged. He'd entered his first amateur competition and been knocked out in the first round. He was questioning whether he had what it took. We were working the heavy bag, me holding it while he threw combinations, when he suddenly stopped and looked at me with tears in his eyes. "How do you do it?" he asked. "How do you keep going when you lose? When everyone says you're not good enough?" I thought about his question, remembering all the times I'd asked myself the same thing, all the times I'd stood at the edge of quitting and somehow found the will to take one more step forward. "You want truth," I said. "Truth is, you don't always believe you can do it. Sometimes you're sure you will fail. Sometimes you're so tired you cannot imagine taking another step. But you do it anyway. Not because you are confident. Because you're more afraid of quitting than you are of failing." He stared at me, processing this, trying to understand how fear could be a motivator instead of a limitation. "Everyone who is champion," I continued, "they all have one thing same. Is not talent. Is not genetics. Is not even hard work. Because many people work hard and never succeed. What make champion is they keep going after point where a normal person would stop. They find something extra, something beyond what they think they have. And once they find this, they never quite same person again." "Did you find it?" he asked quietly. I nodded. "Many times. Every time I think is last time. Every time I find it again when I need it. This is secret. You have more inside you than you know. You always have more. But you only discover this by pushing until you think you cannot push anymore, and then pushing a little bit more." He went back to the bag, hitting it with renewed intensity, and I held it steady, feeling the impact reverberate through my arms, feeling the ache in my shoulders from a lifetime of doing exactly what he was doing now. And I felt something that might have been contentment, or might have been peace, or might have been the simple satisfaction of passing on what I'd learned to someone who might actually use it. The video of my fight with Rashid still circulates online. Every few months, it gets shared again, usually with some caption about never underestimating your opponent or something about age being just a number. I don't watch it anymore. I don't need to. I lived it. I know what happened. I know what it meant. But sometimes, late at night, when I can't sleep and my body aches with the accumulated damage of 4 decades of fighting, I think about that moment when I walked through the arena and 20,000 people booed me. I think about the photographer who spit on my shoes. I think about Khalil offering me money to lose. I think about everyone who was so certain they knew how my story would end. And I smile. Not because I proved them wrong, though I did. Not because I won a fight I wasn't supposed to win, though I did that too. But because in that moment, facing all that hatred and dismissal and contempt, I discovered something fundamental about myself. I discovered that I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their respect. I didn't even need to win, though winning was nice. All I needed was the knowledge that I'd tried, that I'd showed up, that I'd faced the challenge head-on instead of backing down, that I'd refused to let their expectations define my reality. That's the real victory, not the fight, not the knockout, not even the redemption arc that people love to talk about. The real victory is internal. It's knowing that you gave everything you had, that you didn't hold back, that you tested yourself at your absolute limit and discovered you were stronger than you thought. Everything else is just noise. I'm 62 years old now. My body is covered in scars. My joints hurt in cold weather. My hands sometimes shake from old injuries that never quite healed right. I will never fight professionally again. I know this. My time in that world is finished. But I'm not finished. Every morning, I wake before sunrise. Every morning, I train. Not because I have a fight coming up, not because I'm trying to prove anything to anyone else, but because this is who I am. The gym is my church. The weight is my meditation. The suffering is my prayer. And as long as I can still move, as long as I can still breathe, I will keep doing this, because it's the only thing that's ever made sense in a world that rarely does. They humiliated me in Saudi Arabia. They tried to break me. They wanted me to be the cautionary tale, the old fighter who didn't know when to quit, the punchline to a joke about knowing your place. Instead, I became something they never expected. I became the reminder that you can't measure a person's worth by their age or their past or their circumstances. That sometimes the one who looks weakest is the one who's been forged in fires that would have destroyed anyone else. That there's a kind of strength that comes only from surviving, from enduring, from refusing to break no matter how much pressure gets applied. That's my legacy. Not a championship belt. Not a perfect record. Not fame or wealth or any of the things that society tells us matter. My legacy is the lesson I've lived every day of my life. That strength isn't about never falling down. It's about getting back up. Every single time. No matter what. The iron taught me that. The gym taught me that. The years of suffering and sacrifice and refusing to quit taught me that. And now I teach it to others, hoping that somewhere in the next generation there's someone who needs to hear it as badly as I did when I was young and lost and looking for something to believe in. They thought they knew my story. They were wrong. Because my story isn't about one fight in Saudi Arabia. It's about every fight I've ever faced, inside the ring and outside it. It's about every morning I woke up hurting and trained anyway. It's about every time I was told I couldn't do something and did it anyway. It's about refusing to accept that my limitations were final. My story is still being written. And as long as I'm breathing, as long as there's weight to lift and work to be done, it will never truly end. Because I am not my past. I am not my age. I am not what other people think of me. I am what I choose to be. And I choose to be strong. That night, after training Alexei and the other young fighters, I walked home through the cold Russian streets. Snow was beginning to fall, the first of the season, each flake catching the light from the street lamps before disappearing into the darkness. My breath formed clouds in the frigid air, and my old injuries sang their familiar song of protest with every step. But I didn't mind the cold. I'd never minded it. The cold was honest. It didn't pretend to be something it wasn't. It didn't make promises it couldn't keep. It simply was what it was, And you either learned to live with it or you didn't survive. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A message from someone I didn't recognize, with a video attachment. I almost deleted it without watching, but something made me stop. I opened the video. It was security footage from the airport in Riyadh, from the day I'd arrived. The angle was different from the viral video that had spread across social media. This one showed the full scene, not just the moment when the photographer spit on my shoes, but what happened after. It showed me standing there, completely still, my face calm despite the humiliation. It showed the photographer backing away, his smirk faltering when he realized I wasn't going to react the way he'd expected. It showed the crowd slowly going quiet, unsure what to make of my complete lack of response. And it showed something I hadn't noticed at the time. In the background, partially hidden by the crowd, there was a young boy, maybe 12 years old, watching the entire scene with wide eyes. While everyone else laughed or jeered or recorded on their phones, this kid just watched. And when I turned and walked away, refusing to give them the reaction they wanted, the kid's expression changed. His eyes lit up with something that looked like understanding, or respect, or maybe just recognition that there were different ways to respond to cruelty. The message that came with the video was in broken English. "Mr. Anatoly, I am that boy from airport. I never forget what you teach me that day. You teach me that real strength is control. That real power is choosing not to use it. I start training now. I want to be strong like you. Not just body, also mind. Thank you for showing me. You changed my life and you don't even know." I stood there in the falling snow, reading the message over and over, and I felt something crack open inside my chest. All these years, I'd been focused on my own journey, my own battles, my own need to prove myself. I'd thought the fight in Riyadh was about me, about my redemption, about showing the world that I still mattered. But it had never been just about me. Every action we take, every choice we make, every moment when we decide how to respond to the world's cruelty or indifference, we're teaching someone. We're showing them what's possible. We're giving them permission to be strong in their own way. That kid in the airport had been watching. And somewhere, right now, someone else was watching too. Someone who needed to see that you don't have to be young or rich or famous to matter. Someone who needed to know that dignity isn't something other people give you, it's something you claim for yourself. Someone who needed the reminder that the fight isn't over until you decide it's over. I typed out a response, my cold fingers clumsy on the screen. Train hard. Be good person. Remember that true strength is helping others become strong. This is only thing that matter in end. I sent the message and continued walking home, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I truly understood why I'd kept fighting all these years. It wasn't about the victories or the validation or the moments of glory that fade as soon as the spotlight moves on. It was about the example. It was about showing people that you can survive humiliation and come out stronger, that you can face impossible odds and still fight. That age and circumstance and other people's expectations don't have to define your limits. Every rep I'd ever done, every punch I'd ever thrown, every morning I dragged myself to the gym despite the pain and exhaustion and doubt, all of it had been building towards something larger than myself. I'd been forging not just my own strength, but creating a blueprint that others could follow. Proof that the human spirit could endure more than we think it can. Evidence that transformation is always possible, no matter how late you start or how many times you failed. When I reached my apartment building, I paused at the entrance and looked up at the sky. The snow was falling heavier now, covering the world in white, making everything clean and new. Tomorrow, the streets would be slippery with ice. Tomorrow, my body would ache even more than it did today. Tomorrow, there would be new challenges, new obstacles, new reasons why I should just give up and accept that my time had passed. But tomorrow, like every day before it, I would wake before sunrise. I would train. I would push my aging body to its limits and beyond. I would show up for the young fighters who needed to see that consistency matters more than talent. And I would carry the knowledge that somewhere, someone I'd never meet was finding strength in my example, was learning that they too could overcome, could endure, could transform their suffering into something meaningful. That photographer who spit on my shoes thought he was humiliating me. Khalil thought he could buy my integrity. Rashid thought he was facing an easy opponent. The crowd thought they knew how my story would end. They were all wrong, but not because I beat Rashid in the ring. They were wrong because they measured strength in the wrong way. They looked at my age, my appearance, my past, and they saw weakness.
They didn't understand that real strength isn't about never being knocked down. It's about the decision to stand back up. Every single time. Without exception. Without complaint. Without needing anyone's permission or approval. I climbed the stairs to my apartment, each step a small victory over gravity and time and the accumulated damage of a life spent testing my limits. Inside, the apartment was cold. I turned on the heat, made simple food, sat at my small table and ate in silence. This was my life. Unglamorous. Unspectacular. Nothing like the lives of the celebrities and influencers who filled social media with their manufactured drama and carefully curated images of success. But it was mine. I'd earned every moment of it. And I wouldn't trade it for anything. Later that night, before sleep, I did what I always did. I dropped to the floor and began doing push-ups. My arms shook. My chest burned. My body protested in 1,000 different ways. But I kept going because this was my ritual, my meditation, my way of honoring the gift of still being able to move, to fight, to push against my limitations. Somewhere around rep 200, with sweat dripping onto the floor and my muscles screaming for mercy, I understood something fundamental. The humiliation in Saudi Arabia hadn't been about me at all. It had been a test. Not of my fighting ability, but of my character. Not of my physical strength, but of my mental resilience. Not of whether I could win a fight, but of whether I could maintain my dignity when the entire world wanted to strip it away. I'd passed that test. Not perfectly, not gracefully, but I'd passed it. And in doing so, I'd given that kid in the airport, and maybe countless others I'd never know about, the most valuable lesson I had to offer. That you are not what happens to you. You are how you respond to what happens to you. They can take everything from you. Your youth, your health, your opportunities, your reputation. But they cannot take your response. That belongs to you alone. And in that response, in that choice of how to stand in the face of adversity, that's where your true strength lives. I finished my push-ups, lay on the floor catching my breath, and smiled into the darkness of my small apartment. My body hurt. My bank account was modest. My future was uncertain. But I was free in a way that most people never experience. Free from the need for external validation. Free from the fear of humiliation. Free from the prison of caring what others thought of me. They tried to humiliate me in Saudi Arabia. Instead, they'd given me the greatest gift possible. The opportunity to prove to myself, one final time, that I was exactly who I'd always believed I was. A fighter. A survivor. A man who refused to break no matter how much pressure was applied. And somewhere out there, a 12-year-old kid was starting his training, carrying the lesson I'd taught him without meaning to, preparing to face his own battles with the knowledge that dignity is a choice, that strength is internal, that the real fight is always the one within yourself. My story didn't end with that fight in Riyadh. It continued in his story, and in the stories of everyone else who'd witnessed it and found something in it that resonated with their own struggles. That's the true measure of a life, I thought. Not what you accomplish, but what you inspire in others. Not what you achieve, but what you help others believe is possible. I pulled myself off the floor, showered, and lay down in my small bed. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in silence. Inside, my mind finally quieted, the constant noise of doubt and worry and analysis giving way to something that felt like peace. Tomorrow I would train. Tomorrow I would teach. Tomorrow I would continue being exactly who I'd always been, a man who refused to accept that his limitations were final, who found meaning in the suffering, who understood that the iron didn't care about your age or your past or your excuses, it only cared about the work you put in. They'd wanted to humiliate me. Instead, they'd reminded me of everything I'd fought so hard to become. And for that, in a strange way, I was grateful. Because we don't grow through comfort and ease. We grow through challenges and adversity and moments when we're forced to choose between breaking and becoming stronger. I'd made my choice long ago. And I would keep making it, every day, until my body finally gave out and I could push no more. But even then, even at the very end, I would know that I'd lived on my own terms. That I'd faced every challenge head-on. That I'd refused to be diminished by other people's cruelty or indifference or low expectations. That's what they could never take from me. That's what I'd proven in Saudi Arabia, and what I would keep proving every morning when I woke before sunrise and trained despite the pain. That Anatoly from the streets of Russia, The nobody who was too old and too broken and too irrelevant to matter, still had something to offer the world. Not as a champion, not as a star, but as an example of what human beings are capable of when they refuse to quit. When they choose resilience over comfort. When they understand that the measure of a life isn't found in moments of triumph, but in the daily decision to keep showing up, keep fighting, keep pushing towards something better. As I drifted towards sleep, my last thought was of that kid in the airport, beginning his training, carrying forward the lesson I'd taught without words. And I realized that this, more than any victory in any ring, was the real impact of my life. Not what I'd achieved, but what I'd inspired others to attempt. They'd tried to humiliate me. Instead, they'd given me immortality. Not the kind that comes from fame or fortune or having your name remembered in history books, but the kind that comes from planting seeds in other people's hearts, seeds that would grow long after I was gone, that would continue bearing fruit in ways I would never see or know about. That photographer's spit on my shoes had been meant to degrade me, but it had become part of a larger story, a story about refusing to be broken, about maintaining dignity in the face of cruelty, about the quiet strength that comes from knowing who you are and refusing to let anyone else define you. And that story would continue long after the fight was forgotten, long after the videos stopped circulating, long after my name faded from memory. It would continue in every person who faced humiliation and chose to stand tall. In every fighter who was told they were too old and fought anyway. In every human being who discovered that they had more strength inside them than they ever imagined. That was my victory. That was my legacy. That was why I'd kept fighting all these years. Not for them. For the ones who came after. For the ones who needed to see that it was possible. For the kid in the airport, and for everyone like him, who needed proof that the human spirit was unbreakable if you simply refused to let it break. The snow fell. The night deepened, and I slept the sleep of someone who had finally understood the purpose of all their suffering, all their sacrifice, all their years of refusing to quit when quitting would have been so much easier. Tomorrow, I would wake and train and continue being exactly who I was meant to be. Tonight, I rested, knowing that my fight in Saudi Arabia had never really been about me at all. It had been about everyone who would come after, everyone who would need the same lesson I'd learned through pain and persistence and the unwavering belief that we are always capable of more than we think. They'd tried to humiliate me. Instead, they'd made me immortal. The end.